Hi. It appears the fire brigade are responsible for all the deaths at Grenfell. Never mind that the council had closed off one entrance to the flats to stop people walking through a new development they'd built. I think it was it a private school or a library or something they'd built opposite the flat. So they closed off one entrance because they didn't want the plebs walking through their posh areas, okay? Because we're talking about the gentrification of London. And so there was only one entrance, and the firefighters were fighting a fire on a ground floor flat. And there were actually steps going up into that entrance. So, you know, with one small entrance and the firefighters forced to take everything in through that one entrance and therefore blocking parts of the stairs, there was no way that they could have people, hundreds of people, flooding out of the flats. Which then begs the question, you know, I still don't accept the official figure as to the number of dead. I do not accept that. I remember reports at the time that some firefighters had mentioned to local people that they'd found that they had 60 bodies of children. 60 bodies of children. And that the firefighters were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements. Well, do you know what? In light of this, firefighters, I would say it is a necessity by law, and it is illegal, legally by law, you are upheld by the law of necessity to break those non-disclosure agreements now and tell the truth about how many bodies you actually found. Okay? Because, you know, after he, as Mayor of London at the time, cut all the fire services, hundreds of fire stations, sold them off for £2, the princely sum of £2 to private enterprise. And they have the audacity now to blame the fire brigade. When we know for a fact that the residents of Grenfell had repeatedly, as a collective, complained to the council about power surges that were damaging electrical equipment, causing things to explode in the flats through power surges. And the council had not adequately addressed that problem, and indeed it was exactly through a power surge that caused a fridge to explode that started the fire in the first place. The firefighters were not at any point informed by the council that the flats were covered by the cheapest cladding that they could find. Because had they spent just a few £100,000 more, they would have been able to have the fire-resistant cladding, which the firefighters assumed was covering the flats. And they were right to assume that. Because, you know, this cladding contains toxic chemicals that includes, I think, cyanide. Now, we all know about the sofas and soft furnishings that were produced in the late 60s and 70s, that if they caught fire, just the smoke could kill people because the fumes were toxic, and that, you know, soft furnishings now have to be safety checked, and, you know, you're not even allowed to sell these soft furnishings, or they have to be professionally disposed of. Any furnishings from that period. And yet, how many years later, in the 21st century, there we have a council opting for a highly flammable cladding that is made from toxic fumes, every bit as bad as what comes out of sofas, you know, these old soft furnishings. They covered a building in that. A building that they knew was prone to regular power surges, and that they'd done nothing about. A building that they knew they'd blocked off one of the only two entrance and exits from those flats. And then they have the audacity, when the whole building goes up in flames directly through their highly flammable, toxic cladding. They blame the firefighters. It is the firefighters that then have to deal with it, even though they are vastly depleted in numbers, vastly depleted resources. They're expected to deal with it. They're the ones expected to go and collect the bodies, and then they're the ones expected to sign non-disclosure agreements, and then they're the ones that are blamed for it. Now, I will remind every civil servant and public servant, people working in these kind of services who are regularly asked to sign non-disclosure agreements, you have a duty, according to the law of necessity, to break those non-disclosure agreements. I'm going to leave you the link to Katharine Gunn. She was an intelligence translator, and she blew the whistle on a memo from American intelligence asking British intelligence to help them find dirt on UN officials, so then that could be used as leverage to blackmail them into agreeing to the Iraq invasion. And she blew the whistle. And they tried to prosecute her. They tried to imprison her. But she won her case. Her barrister won her case on the grounds of necessity, because it was necessary for people to know, because lives were at risk. The public was at risk. And lives, innocent lives, were at risk abroad. Because what kind of plot is it? A plan for war to invade another country that the pretext of it requires blackmailing officials at the UN or any official anywhere, that people have to be blackmailed into agreeing to that war. Because if there was any true justification for the war, any real evidence, then nobody would have to be blackmailed. You know, we know that criminals use such methods, and so therefore the British public are at risk, and our army, our military is at risk to being involved in actually an illegal war, which now we know the Iraq war was. But you know, they managed to bury her story, even though it came briefly out in the Observer. Suddenly it was buried, it was covered up, nobody heard about it. But the film about it has recently, it has been, I think it was out in August. And I will leave you the link to it, the story of Katharine Gunn, and you can go and see the film at your local cinema, or perhaps order it online. And every civil servant, you need to understand, because what we are dealing with here are demonic, sadistic fascists. That is what they are. They hate the poor, they hate people of colour, they hate women, children, they regularly abuse them in gangs and groups. This is all part of their leverage. We know for a fact Epstein was working for intelligence. His lawyer, as Trump's Labour Secretary, when he was being questioned by Congress about his work as Epstein's lawyer, he said, I was informed Epstein was working for intelligence. Jimmy Savile, the same. Recruiting yes men. Because it's that gang mentality, isn't it? Have you committed a crime? You can't be in our gang unless you've committed a crime, because that's the only way we can trust you. Unless we know you're one of us, you're prepared to abuse a vulnerable child pulled out of a care home who's been trafficked into the country. You're prepared to commit crimes against humanity. You're welcome into our gang, into our club. We all saw Ian Duncan Smith clench his fists with glee and the sadistic look on his face as his bill gets passed through, a bill that drove tens of thousands of people to an early grave. Against the most vulnerable people in our society, the sick and disabled. That itself delivers, empowers, liberates the kind of psychology that then later, you know, I'll leave the link to one of my previous videos, one of my previous recent videos, of which a little 4-year-old girl is confronted by an angry man. She's in a wheelchair on her way to school. An angry man confronts her and her mother and her 10-year-old brother, telling that little girl she should never have been born and she's a drain on society because she's disabled. That is what him and his party have unleashed into our country. People are dead, people are maimed, people are traumatised, people have been left destitute, people are depressed. Now we hear from Channel 4 dispatches, we can be in no doubt what many of us knew already. Channel 4 dispatches has now proved beyond any reasonable doubt that they were doing a secret deal with the USA that does amount basically to murdering British citizens simply by raising the costs of pharmaceutical products to such a degree that people can't afford them, as is happening in America, where you've got diabetics dying because they can't afford the prescription charges for their insulin. And that's even with health insurance, okay? This is something people need to understand. Even with health insurance, people have to pay for their prescriptions in America. And you're talking like £1,000 a month for insulin. You know, like aspirins, for example, 60p in Britain, nearly a tenner in America. That is what, and that is a way of killing people. That is a way of killing the poorer people. Oh, you can't afford your drugs? Yeah, sorry. It is murder. It is murder when we have a National Health Service and he wants to break it down. And here we have here the Daily Telegraph, yet another Eton ragmag posing as a British newspaper. Basically feeding the public fascist propaganda, and it has the audacity to have a poppy. He has the audacity to have a poppy for the Remembrance Sunday, which is coming up soon. Absolute hypocrites. And it is time they were arrested. He needs to be arrested and charged. Members of the Tory party need to be arrested. I'll leave the intel for Brexit. Check the crimes. They're very serious crimes. And you will see how one crime leads to another crime, leads to another crime leads to Brexit. And every time, with every crime, they get more power and more money. And then they're all primed to commit the next crime. You see? And you'll see how each crime is like a Jenga tower. Well, it's time to start pulling the blocks out, and the whole thing's going to collapse. They do plan to turn Britain into a tax haven, Singapore on the Thames. They don't care if they lose Scotland, they don't care if they lose Ireland. They don't care if they lose the Tory party, because we won't need a political party once we're a tax haven, because tax havens do not have general elections. Jersey, for example, has never had a general election. The majority of tax havens offshore are actually Crown territories. And that's what they're protecting. It's sovereignty for the Crown over their tax havens that they're talking about with their Brexit. Because the EU is saying quite rightly, look, the public are paying their taxes out of their actually meagre wages by a very far higher percentage than what any of you corporations are paying. You're earning your profits off this workforce. You are going to put something back into the pot by way of taxes for us to maintain our public services. And that is the other thing. We need to ban privatisation of public services. Because how can a public service really run for profit unless they're going to provide less of a service while demanding more money and finding ways of screwing the public, making profits out of the public that use the service? Like, for example, these academy schools that will receive government funding, even subsidies, but they are running for a profit. So how do they make the profits? Well, you know, you invest in some Chinese manufactured school uniforms that you buy at extremely low prices, and then you flog them to the pupils of your school for really high prices. And then you tell the parents that, no, you have to buy this specific uniform made by this specific manufacturer. We will not allow you to bring your child to school in a top of a similar colour, of the same colour, if it isn't made by our school. No, we will send your child home, because actually it's very important that your child understands that what they wear, how the labels they wear are more important actually than their education. It's insane. Now, I know for a fact that people of my grandmother's generation, they wouldn't have tolerated it. Schools sending children home because they weren't wearing the specific manufactured tops and skirts and trousers. No. But people are tolerating it because we're being ground down, oppressed by these fascist liars who do operate by stealth. It's as I've said before, they're predators. They believe that they're top of the food chain. They're the carnivorous monsters. They're allowed to be like that. Apparently that's what makes them superior. Because they're prepared to kill and actually enjoy it. They enjoy killing. Look what they do to the children, taking them out to kill foxes and then blooding their faces. Little children, they do that. They raise savages. Savages in suits. Oh, they speak so posh and they seem so nice and oh, Boris Johnson, bumbling idiot. He ain't no bumbling idiot. He's a gimp yes man. That's what he is. We're dealing with sadists. Grenfell was, it was, I knew it, equivalent to a snuff movie to people like him, sat there watching poor people and immigrants burning to death, breathing in cyanide. They love it. They loved it. Lying to the public about it, about how many died, and then even have the audacity to produce a report that blames the firefighters. And they're all going to be standing at the war memorials, aren't they? The Remembrance Sunday. Their Remembrance Sunday. Because it's them, all the dignitaries, isn't it? They're ready to lay the wreaths of poppies to remember the war heroes of 2 world wars who gave their lives for this country. Well, I say, you know, to honour my grandfather's memory and all the men who fought with him, I'm going to be there booing you people as you line up to lay your wreaths on the war memorials. I'm going to be there. And I say, anybody, if you want to honour your war dead this year, then you go and you give these bastards some grief as they line up to lay their wreaths of poppies on the war memorials. We should be there booing them and letting them know that every single one of them are hypocrites, because that is what my granddad would have wanted me to do in face of this. He wouldn't want a minute's silence in the face of this fascist attack against our nation that these evil fuckers have done. Even to the point of breaking up our United Kingdom. No. Hitler could not have done worse, right? Murdering 130,000 people through austerity while they all get richer and richer and give themselves huge tax breaks. Dirty bastards. And after they've collapsed the economy with their evil banking collapse, which itself was directly the result of criminal and fraudulent activity. No, my granddad would not. What my grandfather does not want a minute's silence this year, right? My grandfather wants an hour of protest. It is time that the British people of today showed the same courage and backbone as the people of Iceland have done. That they said no to the banking bailouts right from the start. And if they hadn't, they would have been suffering exactly what we've suffered in Britain right now. Because you do not feed these monsters. Because the more you feed them, the more they want. They're greedy monsters. That's what makes them a monster. They are just full of greed, and they are criminals, and they are sadists. They are the devil incarnate. Literally they are, because what is a devil except an evil criminal? That's what a devil is. It's about time we showed them a people who are like God, not like the devil, as we were created to be by this universe, to be like God. Well, Are we being like God? Are we allowed to be like God? Are we not being oppressed to shit to the extent that actually we're angry most of the time, irritable, stressed, oppressed? That life is a burden? That even our children seem like a burden? The things that should bring us joy in life are bringing us misery? Just the fact of trying to run a home, that we can work all the hours we can, and yet still we can't afford to pay our bills or actually have a life worth living, because the whole point of working is that you should be able to enjoy your life as well. We're not here just to work. All work and no play makes Jack and Jane dull girls and boys. And why should we be dull when we're bright, wonderful creatures on this earth? And we want what's best for our planet. He doesn't. He does not want him. He is a representative, is a gimp puppet of his masters, who run the whole economy, who don't like the EU, they don't like free trade unions, they don't like workers' rights, they don't like human rights. How dare anybody who belongs to a party that has pledged and promised to scrap our human rights dare to turn up at a war memorial to lay flowers, to lay a wreath of poppies on that war memorial? How dare he do it? Except he's there laughing, saying, yeah. Secretly spitting, actually spitting on those graves, on the memory of our ancestors. Like, yeah, well, you know, that's what you were there for, cannon fodder, to protect our interests, to protect our seats of power, our institutions. Yeah, you know, you got your Attlee, didn't you, for a few years? You got your bit of welfare state. Don't forget, people, that welfare state that Attlee set up after the war. Notice we never hear about Attlee. You'll never hear the BBC talk about Attlee. You never hear about it. He is like the Prime Minister that never existed. But he did the most wonderful thing, because he honoured the people's choice of post-World War II, and we got our welfare state, and we got our human rights, and we got our NHS, and we got our free education, and we got our services and our nationalised industries, and it all ran alongside capitalist independent businesses and industries. We didn't abolish capitalism. We didn't impose impose communism, but he wants to impose corporate communism, because that's what they amount to. We need to understand what has happened, what is happening, and from there know where we're heading. If we allow his plans to follow through, which is corporate communism, end of democracy, on what? Singapore on the Thames. That's what they want. A tax haven. London City. That's what they're protecting. So like I say, you want to remember, you want to honour the war dead, then you get down to your war memorials this year, and you make sure that these people know what scum we know they are. Okay? Because that is the only way we can defeat them now, is by speaking out. And that's why I'm saying, break your non-disclosure agreements, you civil servants, you public servants. Totally break them. It is necessary now to save our nation, because our nation is under threat. We're talking about a threat against our national security. We're talking about a tyrannical terrorist government that is plotting even now to murder British citizens, now through extortionately priced pharmaceuticals. They're going to kill people by making it impossible for people to buy their medicines. They know what they are doing. It is exactly the same as saying, no, you can't have your medicine. We've made your medicine so expensive you can't afford it, bang, you dead. Sorry, no, if you're prepared to swallow that, people, how can you? How can you? How can anybody in this country stand at a war memorial this year and give a minute's silence with these evil fuckers? How can you do it? And call yourself a human being? Get a backbone, people. Show your courage, because I tell you now, there is no future for the children. Expect to be a slave on the corporate tax haven farm. Okay? And I will leave you the intel for Brexit. You check it out. You check the crime after crime after crime after crime that leads to Brexit. And understand, these need to be arrested. And our security services, I will say to you again, obey the law. Follow the law. Security Services Act 1989. You're there to defend and protect Parliament and our economy. Why is he still not being prosecuted?